Hello and welcome back to the DIY hosting of an email server video series. It's been quite a while since I recorded a video on this subject because I took a short break to record my mini video series on Linux Essentials to try and help some of my users and patrons who are struggling with the Linux side of my video series. Incidentally, please do take a look at that series if you'd like to refresh your Linux knowledge. With that now complete, however, I'm ready to move back onto more technically challenging and interesting topics, starting with how we can extend our email server we set up in this video series a little bit further to make it easier to manage and to make it a little bit more powerful. As I often do, however, before I go any further, I'd like to raise to your attention my Patreon account. This is particularly important for video series I've created which are quite mature like this one, because I make my videos available to patrons first and then release them on YouTube quite a bit later. So if you're interested in viewing videos that aren't available on YouTube yet, if you'd like one-to-one support with me on anything relating to my course, would like to suggest content, or if you'd just like to support my work because you found it useful, then please do visit my Patreon account. Right, on to business then. Let's very briefly review where we got to in the video series to date so that you're up to speed with where you are required to be in order to follow these next few videos successfully. So firstly, we prepared a Raspberry Pi to be a hosting platform. I was using a Raspberry Pi 4 in my case, and I do so for my projects, but you don't have to. You could have used a weaker or more powerful Raspberry Pi, but that is the one that I chose, as it's more than powerful enough to act as both an email server and a web server at the same time. We set it up ready to act as a hosting platform for both emails and websites, and we did this in my website hosting video series called DIY Hosting of a WordPress Website, which you can find on my channel under my playlists if you're interested in having a look at how to set up your Raspberry Pi ready. We then set up our postfix server for our SMTP requirements. SMTP servers allow us to send and receive emails. We then set up a Dovecot server for our IMAP requirements, which is what allows us to write and view emails via an email client, such as Thunderbird. We then secured the server as much as possible, installed Spam Assassin, and then we configured the server to make it legitimate, allowing external clients to accept our emails into their inbox instead of their spam box. If you've followed this course to date then, you'll know that the last point made up about a third of the entire course. One of the hardest things to do when creating an email server by yourself is actually to make sure your emails are considered legitimate. So with all that done then, surely you're finished. We're done, aren't we? Well, the answer is actually yes and no. The fact is, if you're happy with the server as you've got it set now, such that you will only ever have one domain on your server and IP address, and if you don't mind creating Linux user accounts for each email account, even if those user accounts will never be used for any other purpose, then yes, you are good to go and you don't have to watch the following videos. If, however, the answer is that you would like more than one domain to be available on your Raspberry Pi or your email or your Linux server on the same IP address, your external IP address, or you're not keen on using Linux user accounts for your email accounts, probably because you know that it's going to get a bit messy when you add more and more email accounts, then these bonus videos that follow are going to be for you. Okay, so what are we looking at doing then? Well, there are two things we're going to be doing, which are actually completely independent, but also intricately linked, and we're going to cover both of them at the same time because they are linked. They are hosting multiple domains using server name identification, or SNI, which is a technology that actually only became available in 2020 for postfix, so very recently. And we're going to be using virtual mailboxes, which allow us to no longer have to use Linux user accounts for our email accounts. Now, these two things combined are very powerful. Let's see how they're going to change things for us. Okay, so this is how our email system looks as it is now. In this example, we have 4 users, Bob, Mary, Frank and Jane, as an example of course. They each belong to the same domain. So there's bob@domain.com, mary@domain.com, frank@domain.com, and jane@domain.com. Now, how we have this organized at the moment is that we have to have a Linux user for each email account, and the mail is stored in the user's home directory as shown on the right hand side. So each email address is a Linux user, and in their home directory we have the mail.dir directory, which contains the mail. Hopefully none of that comes as a surprise to you if you've been watching the video series to date. Now, one of the main take-home messages from this system is that it doesn't scale very well. You could end up with hundreds of users on the Linux machine if you had hundreds of email accounts, and when an email account is deleted, you have to delete the Linux user as well. It also makes it very hard to manage this system for anything else other than an email server if you've got hundreds of user accounts to deal with. Even if these user accounts are only used for mail, they're still nonetheless Linux user accounts that will pollute your system. Something else you might notice is that by definition there is no way to have the same name twice or domain twice. So for example, if you had info for domain 1 and info for domain 2, so info@domain.com and info@domain2.com, for example, assuming multiple domains are possible just for a minute, the current system doesn't support this, as you can't have the same Linux user with the same name. You couldn't have two info users because you could only have one Linux user called info. So these two problems are an issue if you intend to scale up your operations. So let's look at how we can change this. So this slide is showing you how the mail structure will be defined once we've made a few changes that we'll run through in the next few videos. In this example, we still have Bob, Mary, Frank and Jane as users. But in this case, Bob, Mary, Frank and Jane are not Linux users. There are no Linux user accounts called Bob, Mary, Frank and Jane because there don't need to be. Also in this example, Bob and Mary have email addresses associated with domain.com, whereas Frank and Jane have email addresses associated with domain2.com. So already you can see we've improved the system by allowing us to have users with different domains. The mail is therefore stored in a way that allows us to distinguish between domain and user, and you can see that on the right hand side, where the mail directory structure is located. So you can see here we have the home and the vmail directories first. Now you're familiar with home, that's the home directory at the root of the Linux operating system, but vmail is nothing more than a user, but it's the same user for each of these email accounts, and we'll be creating that user as part of the next few videos as part of the setup process. After that, within the user's directory, home directory, we have the domain. So domain.com and domain2.com will be folders in the user vmail's home directory, after which there will be the usernames, Bob, Mary, Frank and Jane in this case, followed by mail.dir, in which the mail is located. That should be familiar. So you can see the difference between the two. In this latter format, we've got an ability to distinguish between domains. In the previous format, every email account had to be a Linux user, and therefore there was no way of distinguishing between different domains. Even if these had different domains, we wouldn't be able to distinguish them. Furthermore, we can now have the same username twice. In the previous case, if we wanted info for domain and info for domain2, so info@domain.com and info@domain2.com, it wouldn't have been possible, because you cannot have the same Linux user with the same name twice. However, in this case, because we can separate the users out by their domain, we could have, for example, info@domain.com and info@domain2.com, because they'd be located in different directories. So hopefully you can see that in many ways this is a preferable system to what we have currently, and it's a step beyond a hobby project, which is probably where we're at the moment, and is very much heading in the direction of a self-hosting platform, which for many is what this video series is all about. So if you're keen to go up to the next level, and indeed the final level for our email server, then watch the next few videos and we'll get you to this final stage. As always, I hope you found this video useful and hopefully a good stepping stone onto the next few videos. If you have, please do like it and please do subscribe to my video series, as that's the best way of showing me that you enjoy the subject matter. And if you'd be kind enough to contribute on my Patreon account, that would be wonderful if you found it helpful. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Thank you very much.